Welcome back to Silent Paws and Brave Hearts. The gun was already raised when Shadow stepped in front of it. Not barking, not snarling, just standing, all 90 pounds of graying, battle-worn German Shepherd planted in the snow between his Marine and the men who had come to make sure neither of them left these mountains alive. The cold was absolute. The burning cabin threw orange light across the clearing. Smoke poured into the winter sky, and Shadow stood in the middle of it all like something ancient and unmovable, amber eyes steady, gray muzzle lifted, refusing, simply completely refusing to step aside. Daniel Hayes looked down at his dog, and for the first time in longer than he could remember, his eyes filled with tears. This is where the story ends, but to understand why that moment mattered, you have to go back to where it began. Daniel was 52 years old and had stopped expecting his life to mean anything. That is a hard sentence to read. It was a harder thing to live. He had served 24 years in the United States Marine Corps, 3 deployments, 2 commendations, 1 explosion outside Kandahar that left a scar along his jawline and a ringing in his left ear that never fully went away. He had come home from war the way many men do, intact on the outside, quietly fractured somewhere deeper. His wife had tried, God knows she had tried, but there are wounds that don't show on an X-ray, and she had spent 11 years loving a man who could never fully come back through the door, even when he was standing right in front of her. The divorce was finalized on a Wednesday morning in a courthouse hallway. They didn't argue, they didn't cry, they signed where the attorney pointed and walked out into separate parking lots. His daughter, Ellie, was 23 and living in Seattle. She called on his birthday and at Christmas, and sometimes in between, but their conversations had the careful, padded quality of 2 people who loved each other and no longer knew how to say so. He had 1 photograph of her on his phone. He looked at it more than she knew. After the divorce, Daniel moved into a VA apartment in Roanoke that smelled like old carpet and other people's quiet desperation. He lasted 4 months. Then, one October morning, he loaded everything he owned into the bed of his truck, lifted Shadow into the passenger seat, and drove into the Appalachian Mountains without a plan. Shadow was 10 years old. His muzzle had gone gray. His movements had slowed just slightly at the edges, but his amber eyes were the same as they had always been, watchful, steady, present. He had served beside Daniel through the worst years of both their lives, and when the Corps retired him, Daniel had signed the adoption papers the same afternoon. There had been no deliberation. You don't deliberate about family. Shadow pressed his nose against the passenger window as the mountains rose around them, reading the air, already beginning to settle in the way dogs do when they sense that something is finally going to be okay. Daniel wasn't sure he believed that yet, but he trusted Shadow's instincts more than his own. The Harlan County tax foreclosure auction was held on a Tuesday in a wood-paneled room that smelled of burnt coffee and old ambition. Daniel had gone out of mild curiosity. He'd seen the notice posted at the general store and thought, vaguely, that land might be a wiser investment than the motel he'd been sleeping in. The county clerk worked through the listings in a flat, practiced voice. Parcels sold and moved on. Then she read the next entry. The Carter Homestead, 140 acres, Western County. Assessed value, $42,000. Opening bid, $500. The room changed. It didn't make a sound, that was the thing. A dozen people sat in those folding chairs and not one of them moved, not one paddle lifted. The silence had weight to it, the particular weight of a decision already made collectively long before this morning. Daniel looked around the room slowly. Then he raised his paddle. 500, he said. The clerk looked up, scanned the room. Going once, going twice. A pause that stretched one beat too long. Sold. No congratulations, no eye contact. As Daniel rose to sign the paperwork, an old rancher in a canvas coat leaned slightly toward him without turning his head. "Son," the man said quietly, "some land stays empty for a reason." Daniel signed his name and drove out to see what he'd bought. The cabin sat at the end of 2 miles of dirt road swallowed by timber so dense the afternoon sky nearly vanished. It was solidly built, log and stone, the work of someone who intended permanence, but 15 years of abandonment had left their mark. Vines climbed the north wall, the porch railing had buckled, pine needles drifted knee-deep against the front door. Daniel pushed it open and stopped breathing for just a moment. A coffee mug sat on the kitchen table. 15 years and it was still there. A dark ring stained into the wood beneath it like a signature. A canvas coat hung beside the door. Work boots sat beneath it, laces still tied, waiting for feet that never came back. On the wall near the window hung a single photograph. A man in his late 30s, smiling, his arm around a small girl who couldn't have been older than 6. She was laughing at something outside the frame. Her father was watching her laugh instead of the camera. Daniel stood in front of that photograph for a long time. Near the window, a reporter's notebook lay open on the table. The handwriting was hurried but deliberate. Names, dates, creek coordinates, water sample locations. A man had sat at this table and written these words, believing they would become something, believing someone would read them. Shadow moved quietly through the rooms, nose working close to the floor, reading a story Daniel could not access. He paused at the boots. He paused at the photograph. Then he walked to the fireplace and sat down directly in front of the hearthstone, and made a sound Daniel had only heard from him once before. Not a bark, not a whine, something from deeper in the chest, low and sustained, almost like grief. Daniel knelt beside him and placed a hand on his back. "What do you know?" he murmured. Shadow looked at him once, then back at the stone. Daniel learned what he could about Thomas Carter through phone signal that came and went with the weather. A local reporter, 15 years missing. Truck found near a rural property in the western county. Case never solved. A daughter who had been 6 years old when he disappeared. The girl in the photograph. Daniel sat with that for a long time. He began noticing other things. A truck moving slowly past the end of his road every few days. A conversation at the general store that stopped the moment he walked in. Sheriff Dalton Briggs, visiting one afternoon, warm and smiling, eyes moving over the cabin with the careful attention of a man doing inventory. "Quiet out here," Briggs said pleasantly. "That's what I came for," Daniel said. "Some folks find it too quiet, don't tend to stay long." "I tend to stay," Daniel said. Briggs smiled all the way to his truck. But Daniel watched him go with the particular stillness of a man who has learned that the most dangerous people are the ones who never raise their voice. The snowstorm arrived on a Thursday and buried the valley for 31 hours. Past 2 in the morning, lantern light burning low, wind tearing at the roof, Daniel made a decision he couldn't fully explain. He retrieved the pry bar from his tool chest and knelt before the hearthstone. Shadow sat behind him the entire time, watching, waiting. It took an hour to break the old mortar. When the stone finally shifted, Daniel worked his fingers beneath it and lifted. The metal ammunition box was wrapped in oilcloth, sealed against moisture, hidden with the careful intention of a man who hoped someone worthy would eventually find it.
Inside, water sample reports showing contamination at 15 sites along the Valley Creek, laboratory confirmations of toxic mining byproducts far beyond any legal threshold, maps of illegal discharge points, 15 years of meticulous documented evidence that Titan Ridge mining had been quietly poisoning the groundwater that thousands of Valley families depended on. And at the back of the box, a final journal entry in Thomas Carter's handwriting. They know I have it. I'm publishing Monday regardless. If something happens to me, the box is under the hearth. Please find it. Please tell the truth. My daughter's name is Grace. She deserves to know her father tried. Daniel read that last line twice. He set the journal down on the hearthstone. He pressed his fist against his mouth. And Shadow moved forward and pressed his whole warm body against Daniel and stayed there, breathing slowly, the way he always had when the weight became too much for one man to carry alone. Victor Langford arrived 4 days later, silver-haired, wool coat, the composed elegance of a man who had never lost anything he truly wanted to keep. He stood near the door and offered
$75,000 in cash, 72-hour close, as casually as another man might offer directions. "It's not for sale," Daniel said. Langford studied him with patient, measuring eyes. "Mr. Hayes, you paid $500. I'm offering $75,000. "I heard you," Daniel said. "It's not for sale." The smile left Langford's face the way winter light leaves the mountains, slowly, completely, without drama. "Some discoveries," he said quietly, "can make a man's life very short." He left without another word. Daniel stood at the window until the black SUV disappeared into the tree line. Then he contacted Michael Torres, his brother from a different war, now an investigative journalist in Washington, through an encrypted satellite communicator. "Mike, I need you to receive files, and I need a promise." "Anything," Torres said immediately. "I need you to go to the FBI, federal, not local." A silence. Then, "Daniel, are you safe?" Daniel looked at Shadow across the room. "I've got my partner," he said. "We'll hold." They came on Saturday night. Shadow heard them first. He rose from the rug without a sound, every muscle locked, eyes on the door. The growl that came from him was not loud. It was continuous and certain, the sound of a dog who has already decided what happens next. The door came in hard. A figure in dark clothing moved through fast, and Shadow was faster. He crossed the room like a dark current and drove the man into the doorframe, jaws on his forearm before the gun hand could rise. The weapon hit the floor. The man hit the floor. Daniel had him secured in under a minute. The man said only one thing before he pulled free and disappeared into the dark. "There are more of us." Daniel looked at Shadow, both of them breathing hard in the sudden quiet. "I know," Daniel said. "I know, brother." He spent the night the way Marines spend the last hours before a breach, not with fear, but with the cold, methodical steadiness of a man who has accepted what is coming and decided to meet it standing up. He had already transmitted Carter's files to Torres. The truth was safe. Whatever happened to Daniel Hayes now, Thomas Carter's life's work would reach the light. The second storm came before dawn, heavier than the first. And with it came Langford's men. 4 of them, organized, patient, moving through the tree line with professional quiet. The siege lasted 40 minutes that felt like 4 hours. Glass shattered, wood splintered. Daniel moved through the darkened cabin, low and deliberate, Shadow at his left side, the way he had always been, reading the spaces, sensing angles, breathing in the language of danger that only the 2 of them shared. Then the back window exploded inward. A man came through fast and low. Shadow was already there,
He crossed the floor in 3 strides and hit the man with his full weight, driving him down, jaws locked on his wrist, with a force that left no argument. The gun skidded across the boards. Daniel reached it in 2 steps. "Good boy," he said softly. "Just that." Then the smell hit them. Accelerant. Fire. The front wall caught within seconds, curtains dissolving, the ceiling above the front room beginning to glow. Daniel grabbed Carter's original journals. The copies were safe, but these belonged to history, to Grace Carter, to the truth, and drove through the back door into the freezing night. Langford was waiting. 20 yards back in the falling snow, his men fanned around him, rifles leveled. Calm, certain, the posture of a man who has done this before and faced no consequences. Daniel stepped out into the cold with his hands at his sides, and Shadow stepped in front of him. The old dog moved forward and planted himself between Daniel and the rifles and did not move. 90 pounds of gray-muzzled, battle-worn shepherd standing in the snow with the absolute conviction of an animal who has decided that this is his person, this is his ground, and he will not be moved from either. Daniel looked down at him. "Shadow," he said. His voice broke on the single word. The dog glanced back at him once, those amber eyes steady and warm and completely unafraid. Then he faced forward again. The rotors came from the north, heavy, close, descending fast through the storm. Blue light strobed through the tree canopy. A searchlight swept the clearing like a sudden dawn breaking over the mountains. Federal agents came through the tree line from 3 directions, voices carrying across the snow, badges catching the firelight. Victor Langford stood very still and slowly raised his hands. 6 weeks later, the snow began its retreat. Titan Ridge Mining collapsed under federal indictment. Langford was charged. Briggs resigned and was later arrested. Contamination cleanup orders went out across the valley watershed. Families who had been drinking poisoned water for 15 years were finally told the truth. Thomas Carter's evidence was published across 17 national outlets. His name was spoken with the word hero beside it. His daughter Grace, 21 years old, living in Charlottesville, read her father's final journal entry on a Tuesday morning and wept for a long time. Then she wrote a letter to a veteran she had never met. She said only, "Thank you for finishing what he started. He would have trusted you." Daniel folded the letter carefully and placed it in his breast pocket, close. On a gray March morning, he stood at the edge of the property, looking at the ruined cabin. The walls still stood. Through the collapsed roof, a pale sky showed its first quiet suggestion of blue. Shadow pressed against his leg. Daniel knelt slowly in the mud and rested his forehead against the old dog's graying head. His hand found the warm fur of Shadow's neck and stayed there, feeling the steady heartbeat beneath, still strong, still faithful, still present. "We did right by him," Daniel whispered. "Tom Carter. We did right by him, brother." Shadow's tail moved once, slow and gentle against the cold ground, not because he understood the words, but because his Marine was kneeling beside him in the mud and breathing easier than he had in years, and that was the only thing Shadow had ever needed to know. Some battles are never fought on foreign soil. Some of the bravest men never make the news. Thomas Carter sat alone in a mountain cabin and tried to tell the truth, and the world wasn't ready to listen. Daniel Hayes and a graying old dog made sure the world had no choice, because loyalty doesn't retire, courage doesn't check the calendar, and the truth, no matter how long it's been buried beneath cold stone in a forgotten valley, always finds its way to the light. That's what a dog understands that we sometimes forget. Stay, guard, don't leave your person, not ever. If this story moved something in you today, if it reminded you of someone brave, someone faithful, someone who never gave up, even when the world stopped watching, please take one moment to subscribe to Silent Paws and Brave Hearts. Every week, we bring you stories of veterans and their dogs, stories of quiet courage, of unbreakable bonds, of loyalty that outlasts everything. Subscribe, share this story with someone who needs to hear it, and leave a comment below with the name of a veteran you want to honor today. Because some stories deserve to be heard, because some sacrifices deserve to be remembered. Until next time, thank you for being here.